Okay, so let's first tackle on the issues that are expected to be discussed, let's say terrorism and the anti-illegal drugs. Can you tell us about this one?
Well, I mean, of course, South China Sea, the issue of terrorism, and increasingly also transnational crime are now part of the agenda of the ASEAN. On one hand, of course, there's a huge expectation that there will be some sort of a breakthrough on discussions of a code of conduct, legally code of conduct in the South China Sea. I think the promise by the DFA, Department of Foreign Affairs, was that at least within the end of this year, we'll have a framework agreement so that finally we can have a legally binding one within the coming years, because we don't even have the framework agreement for that. Although last time I checked, as someone who really follows what's happening in ASEAN, it was back in 2011 that we agreed to have a framework agreement. So it took us 6 years, if we're lucky enough this year, to get at least that framework agreement. But there are two other burning issues here that I think there's even greater amount of consensus, because on the issue of South China Sea and code of conduct, there are certain countries, unfortunately within the ASEAN, that are towing the line of some external countries. And essentially, I doubt that if those countries will allow us to get the consensus necessary, even on negotiation of a framework. So I'm not holding out too much hope on that, but I think the Philippines has already made a promise, and we're going to push hard for that. I think the discussion I heard from DFA earlier was that they're going to fast-track the negotiations. Now, how exactly they're going to do that, I don't know, but they're clearly putting diplomatic pressure on the rest of ASEAN to go along with this. But of course, the other two burning issues, one is the issue of terrorism. This is a big thing, actually. The other month, in a meeting in Singapore, I had some discussion with Malaysian Foreign Minister Hashimuddin Hussein, and also with our own Defense Minister, Mr. Lorenzana. It seems there is a clear concern that ISIS, or the so-called Islamic State, as they suffer defeats in the Middle East, they are going to expand more here into Southeast Asia, particularly in peninsular Southeast Asia. And you already have an out-of-control situation with Abu Sayyaf conducting these piracy raids against other countries, including, I think there was an incident where a Vietnamese vessel just yesterday was also victimized by extremist groups engaging in piracy. So the issue of terrorism and transnational crime are now coming together. So you have this very dangerous cocktail of new challenges, new security challenges that demand tremendous amount of cooperation among countries. Now, since last year, President Duterte has given a go-ahead for Indonesia and Malaysia to have quote-unquote hot pursuits of these terrorist groups who are engaging in piracy against their own citizens. I think all the way into the Philippine waters, if it's necessary. And that kind of trilateral Philippine, Malaysia, Indonesia cooperation is expected to be further strengthened and also expanded. Because the thing is this, ISIS is not only a threat to 2 or 3 countries, it's going to be a threat to entire ASEAN. And you have also countries like Thailand and Singapore, which are not also Muslim majority countries like us, but they have a significant, problem also when it comes to, issues of terrorism and extremism. So at least 4 or 5 countries in the ASEAN share this concern very urgently, and the rest of the ASEAN is not necessarily immune. So you might see some concrete discussion about how can we expand intelligence sharing, how can we have more tactical cooperation beyond just joint patrols, or in fact continue these joint patrols and get more countries in. So you need more money, you need more funds, and inevitably, not only ASEAN, but our traditional partners like the United States will be very important for us. So you have the United States actually recently giving you weapons to the Philippine government to fight against terrorism and insurgency. And as far as intelligence is concerned, I think the United States is well ahead of the curve than any other great power that can help us. So you could see ASEAN and US moving towards greater cooperation on that issue of terrorism. And lastly is, of course, President Duterte's pet project, which is this issue of drugs, fighting drugs. Now, we know the Philippines itself is in the middle of this war on drugs. There has been some controversy. The president himself is reevaluating the direction of the war on drugs. But clearly, I think you'll see President Duterte, especially later on in this year when he's going to give his chairman's statement around November, he's going to put the issue of drugs, fighting illegal drugs, front and center, because we understand that proliferation of drugs is not only a national issue. I think there was a recent report by the Philippine government that suggests a lot of the illegal drugs in this country is domestically created in laboratories, but nonetheless, you have transnational syndicate groups from Latin America, from other Asian countries involved in this trafficking. So there's no way that one country alone can deal with it. This is a shared security problem. Therefore, it's important for our different, countries to come together. Now, today we are talking about people who are involved. There are foreign ministers, but I think down the road, the clear, tangible, tactical discussions will be when you have the ASEAN's defense ministers meeting.
That is when?
ADMM. I think it will be within the coming months. It should be within the second quarter of this year.
So for the ones we have, like the last couple of days, these are more, do we have actual concrete framework for each, for terrorism, for illegal drugs, for the borders that are around there? Are we going to have that concrete framework, or will just be all discussions and open theories coming back and forth?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is a year-long event, right? So the event in Boracay is going to just set the tone. And I think the scenic background is going to help them to have more easier reflection. I mean, the whole idea is that this is going to be a retreat. It's going to be kind of a short-sleeve, informal gathering. It's about helping foreign ministers to build rapport. Because, in ASEAN diplomacy, rapport is very important. Because this is not like the European Union, whereby, you can have certain strict laws or certain leadership imposing upon other members what to do. ASEAN is what they call a supranational organization, whereby each country preserves its own sovereignty. No one can tell them what to do. It's not like in the European Union when you have a central bureaucracy can tell individual states to follow a specific law, whether they want it or not. That's not the case here. So you need to build consensus. Now, the difficulty that I have with the ASEAN consensus-based decision-making process is that it has done wonders over the past 4 to 5 decades to make sure that we have a semblance of unity in terms of dealing with our internal problems. But the reality is that the more sensitive the issue becomes, the more difficult it is for us to get consensus, because not all countries see eye to eye, and certain countries actually see an issue in complete contradiction to other member countries. And I think the fundamental problem is that we misinterpret the concept of consensus. In ASEAN today, it means unanimity. And unanimity means everyone has to be on board. So if only one country says no, nothing happens. So that is why there will be some difficulties in dealing with some more sensitive issues like South China Sea. But I'm more optimistic that on the issue of terrorism, and probably fighting in transnational crime like a proliferation of illegal drugs, by the end of this year, you'll have something more concrete.
But then again, Richard, I just wanted to butt in. When you talk about that, pulling in the international commitment, is there a higher chances of that actually happening? Because you did mention there are certain challenges, but this time around, are you more positive that you can actually get the commitments of these the ASEAN nations?
Well, much will also depend on the Philippines, how much political capital, how much diplomatic capital we're willing to put on the table. I mean, the fact of the matter is that on an issue like South China Sea, the Philippines itself has quite radically changed its position. I mean, over the previous years, from 2012 to 2016, the Philippines was on the forefront of taking a tough position against China. And unfortunately, that didn't get much traction. Now, under President Duterte, you have quite a different approach. I think for President Duterte, the issue of South China Sea is a secondary priority as far as the region is concerned. And I think Secretary Yasa made it clear the other month that it's an issue whereby there's no clear consensus on how to move forward to get a tangible result to really shape the behavior of countries, including China, which is not an ASEAN member but an ASEAN strategic partner. So I think in that light, you can expect this government putting more, political capital into pushing alternative issues. I think, again, on the issue of fighting terrorism, I won't be surprised if, especially during the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting and the ASEAN Defense Ministers meetings plus with U.S. and others, we will get some concrete outcome out of that. General defense ministers are more no-nonsense because they're dealing with fundamental security issues, while foreign ministers are more about developing rapport. I'm not underestimating the role, but the reality is this, especially within the context of ASEAN.
But Richard, also taking into consideration the different political aspects already that's coming in, because we have a new president, President Duterte, and also this is the first seniors meeting after the Donald Trump. Am I correct?
Of course, yeah.
So again, you have political heads changing. Will also that affect whatever comes into the table?
Well, at this point in time, I think the concern in ASEAN is that the Trump administration may mean not only uncertainty, but instability, at least on two fronts. One is on the South China Sea issue. You already see that the U.S. continuing so-called routine patrols in the South China Sea. The other day, the report is coming out. And the Trump administration has a lot of China hawks who may really up the ante against China in ways that the Obama administration was not willing to. So everyone is bracing for more tension between the two giants, regardless of what we do. So this is not only about what we do towards China and South China Sea, it's about how we also deal with these giants clashing in the high seas. But the other issue is Trump's anti-free trade position could also have huge ramifications for ASEAN. Because aside from China, a lot of ASEAN countries run huge trade surplus with the United States, including the Philippines, although not as much as other countries like Thailand and Malaysia. So it's not impossible. It's not in the realm of impossibility that Trump one day might go also after some of us ASEAN countries who are running a lot of export, who are having a lot of exports to the US but not importing enough. So we also have to brace for the economic impact of the Trump administration. And that's where I think the foreign minister can set the tone, but it's down to the economic ministers, like finance ministers, to discuss that more thoroughly.
I think we will have to find out later on what will happen in today's meeting after
Sure.
the last couple of days. Thank you so much for that,
My
Richard.
pleasure, of
Nice to
course.
have you
My
again.
pleasure.
Thank